part of the feedback I received on the previous episode of Why Games Matter was that I should do a bit more to explain what exactly the games that I cover are. Initially, I felt that there were plenty of other videos on the internet that answered that question, but I think it would probably be wise to do a bit more of that groundwork myself for the sake of completeness. We are living in an amazing time. Games are finally beginning to grow up after a decade of adolescence. They've still got a long way to go, but every year there are more games exploring the boundaries of what the medium is capable of, and there seems to be no end in sight. Games changed my life. I grew up with them and they've defined who I am, but many people don't play them at all, or think of them as simple toys. I'm not a game apologist. Games, for the most part, are stupid. For every thought-provoking experience, there's a dozen games about Shooty McShootface. On this show, I shine the light on what I think is the best of the best, and my hope is that even if you don't play games at all, I can show you a little bit of why I think they matter. Keep in mind, though, that the primary reason games matter is because you can interact with them. Therefore, anything I do on this show is really only going to scratch the surface of what makes these games significant, so I would always recommend playing the games I discuss instead of watching my videos. To talk about Gone Home is to talk about its story. Much of the magic of the game comes from the way in which it unfolds its mysteries. As usual, I would advise that you play the game before even watching this video, but since I do not necessarily want to ruin the experience for viewers who have not played the game, I will refrain from discussing the story in detail for the first part of this video, and there will be a clear spoiler warning before I do delve in. Gone Home is a mystery exploration game set in an abandoned house. You play as Caitlin Greenbrier, the oldest daughter of the Greenbrier family, who returns home from a trip to Europe to find her parents' new home completely abandoned. You explore the house and attempt to unravel the mystery of what happened while you were away, and where everyone has gone. Gone Home is the first game by the Fulbright Company, a small independent game studio out of Portland, Oregon, consisting of Steve Gaynor, Jonathan Nordhagen, Carla Zimonia, and Kate Craig. Most of the team solidified their working relationship on the Minerva's Den downloadable chapter for BioShock 2. Although very different games, there are some clear parallels between BioShock and Gone Home in the ways in which they go about their storytelling. They both rely heavily on audio log narration, as well as environmental storytelling, where the objects found around the player tell a story. Gone Home is a minimalist game from a mechanical perspective. On a superficial level, you could draw comparisons to Dear Esther, as in both you spend the entire game walking around, looking at things, and listening to narration. But the similarities stop there, as Gone Home does not use airiness as space for pondering metaphor, but instead takes a literal and matter-of-fact approach, avoiding contrivances in all aspects, in order to maintain a grounded and believable sense of place. The game has a definite overtone of horror, most obviously with the dark and stormy night trope. At every dark hallway or unopened door, you expect some terrible ghost or monster to pop out and scare you. This ambiance is reinforced by the beautiful but haunting soundtrack by Chris Remo. Set in 1995, the game is a nostalgia trip for anyone who lived through the American 90s, with artifacts of the era strewn generously about the environment. The period aesthetic could easily feel manipulative, but there's such an attention to detail in the environment that it's easy to forget that it's all an imitation of an era. It just feels right. One of the elegant aspects of Gone Home is the way in which it carries this detail-oriented approach through to its mechanics. The ability to pick up, interact with, or examine almost every object in the environment is essential to discover the story and progress through the game. It is worth noting that unlike most games where the player has no particular attachment to the environment and can happily toss things anywhere, in Gone Home, since this is your parents' house, there is a narrative reason to clean up your messes and put things back where they belong. Therefore, it only makes sense that the game has a put-back mechanic. Alright everybody, this is the point where this video goes into spoilers, so you can just turn it off now if you haven't played the game. Gone Home is a masterpiece at subverting expectations. Early on, the game relies heavily on its horror tropes to build suspense. It is as much a surprise that Sam's story is a love story at all, as it is that it is between two girls. But by the time the player realizes that there are no ghosts or monsters, they are already invested in the outcome of Sam and Lonnie's story. Still, the game carries a foreboding sense of dread throughout the rest of the story, with the ominous red lights of the attic eventually revealing a hopeful ending. The story in Gone Home is not the most original story ever told, and perhaps it wouldn't win any awards if it were told through literature or film. But the simple fact is that it is a story that, to my knowledge, has never been told in a game before. A simple love story about real people in real life situations. Ultimately, Gone Home's greatest success is being something that almost no games are, vulnerable. But perhaps that is more of a damning commentary on the state of games than it is a point of universal recognition for Gone Home. Gone Home almost feels like a game that is impossible to appreciate fully unless you've been steeped in the culture of games, a culture that's sexist, racist, homophobic, and preoccupied with death and destruction. Inside this culture, games routinely get lavished with near universal praise for only doing one new thing, the diamond in the turd, so to speak. If you sat someone, a normal person, down to play BioShock, for example, and talk about how it's a smart game with commentary on libertarian philosophy, how it's about finding the right path in an amoral world, or the dangers of relying on people to do the right thing, they'll think you're crazy the first time they realize the game expects them to zap somebody with magic lightning and then blow their head off with a shotgun. And they'd be right, more or less. The truth is, in video games, that type of thing has been normalized. The sociopathic behavior is so ubiquitous that it's just wallpaper at this point. If you're an intelligent and empathetic person, it's hard to really not feel gross while playing a lot of video games. You often feel like you're trapped in an abusive relationship. You keep trying to ignore all the bad parts and just focus on the good ones. Maybe they'll change. But there does seem to be some glimmer of hope, and Gone Home is evidence of that. It's a game that sets out to tell a story about teenagers in love. Not in space, not with explosions going off behind them, just normal teenagers in normal high school, in normal love. I suppose at this point it would seem relevant for me to highlight that the love story is actually between two teenage girls, instead of a boy and a girl. This is not an insignificant point, for as rare as honest depictions of love are in games, anything more than a caricature of homosexuality is almost non-existent. There are players for whom Gone Home will be the first time they have felt honestly represented in a game. Although it is important that this story is specifically about a girl discovering her own sexuality in the midst of an unsupportive family, and that fact solidifies its level of vulnerability, I do not want to reduce this down to a lesbian game. This is a story about love and growing up, and I guarantee that you will be able to relate to at least some of the feelings, regardless of how similar your own experience has been. So far I've focused on Sam and Lonnie's story, as that's what the game focuses on too. But the other members of the Greenbrier family have their own stories to uncover as well. From Terry's childhood trauma at the hands of his uncle, to Janice's flirtation with infidelity. Even the secondary characters are more developed and believable than the average video game protagonist. Gone Home is a game about memory and secrets. In the literal sense, it's an archaeology dig through artifacts and mementos, hidden passageways, and crumpled up pages. In a more abstract way, it's a game about how the objects that we leave behind us tell our stories, and about how a building only becomes a home because of the memories that we make there. It is also a love story, and although this aspect would be difficult to praise in another medium, inside of games, an honest take on the subject matter is so rare that it would be worth mentioning on this basis alone. Still, by allowing the player to piece the story together themselves and become familiar through exploration both with an environment and the history within it, Gone Home leverages the medium of games to create a stronger emotional investment than would have been achieved otherwise. It also plays with the expectations of violence that games have developed in order to frame a unique way of telling what is otherwise a very simple love story. It's a focused game with clear goals that executes on those goals brilliantly, and that's why it matters.